Great. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Jim Walker. I'm the co-founder of the Climate Group and director of our international programs and strategy based here in the US. Welcome to our first session of Innovation Game Changers, which will be a regular set of online conversations featuring entrepreneurs in our network who are creating exciting technologies, products and services for the low carbon economy. And today we're very pleased to be joined by three speakers. We've got a small select guest audience from our members and partners, and they'll be submitting questions to the speakers through the session. We'll then circulate a recording to our wider network after the event. So it's great to have everyone with us today. Why we're doing this? Well, it's obvious that the universe of clean tech companies that are out there in the space is very wide. You know, the Global Clean Tech 100 ranking that comes out every year receives over 9,000 applications and nominations now. But what's been obvious to me and to the Climate Group over the last few years is that there's a subset of those companies that we view as real potential game changers on climate change and on resource challenges that are facing us. And we're keen to work to support some of those game changers in our network where we can, and also to help some of the cities and state governments and corporations in our network connect with them, and hopefully to get some insights about how to encourage more innovators and entrepreneurs like them to set up within their jurisdictions and to do business with their organizations. So that's part of our mission with these hangouts and our wider work with people like our three speakers today. So today's group of companies are all working in the materials space, and we'll try and keep to a theme for each of our hangouts going forward. So three really interesting innovators on low carbon materials, looking to revolutionize three major material sectors, actually: packaging, building materials and plastics. And each sector represents some big numbers in terms of global resource use and carbon emissions. And each of the solutions that's been developed by our three intrepid entrepreneurs promises a radical reduction in footprint. So if you had widespread adoption of the products and services that these guys are developing, it would be a big outcome and a big positive outcome for the climate, which is why we're particularly excited to be working with them and to have them with us today. We've also been working over the last 7 years with our partners at the Dutch Postcode Lottery in the Netherlands to support the annual Green Challenge Prize, which awards over $1 million each year to two to three green entrepreneurs. The first prize is €500,000. Two of our panelists with us today are Green Challenge winners, and the process for the 2014 Green Challenge kicks off in mid-March this year, and we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the call. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce our three speakers for today. We're joined by Eben Beyer, who's the CEO and co-founder of Ecovative, based in New York State, upstate New York. Ginger Krieg Dozier, who's the founder and CEO of Biomason, based down the road from me in North Carolina. And Mark Harema, who's the Chief Executive Officer of New Light. And I'm going to ask each of the speakers to present their work and their organizations for about 10 minutes. I'll introduce them all a little bit more before they speak, and then we'll move to a Q&A at the end for 15 minutes. And for those of you that are listening in online, you can submit your questions online, and I will do my best towards the end of the call to relay those questions to our speakers. So first up we have Eben Beyer, CEO and co-founder of Ecovative. Ecovative is a material science company that develops organic packaging and building materials. First met Eben back in 2008 when I think he was 21 years old at the time, won I think the second Postcode Lottery Green Challenge over in the Netherlands that I was privileged to be part of the panel for. And since then, it's been great to watch Eben and Ecovative go from strength to strength, still racking up prizes. I saw they won the Buckminster Fuller Prize last year. And Eben, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay.
Your minutes on Ecovative.
All right. So am I now? Do you guys see me? Is it
Yep.
switched to my screen? Great. So as mentioned in the introduction, Ecovative is a company that is initially tackling what we think of as the plastics waste problem in packaging. This concept that we use polymers that take really millions of years to get the precursor material synthesized for days or weeks. before we then dispose of them. So polystyrene or polyethylene packaging that comes around your computer or your television is a great example of that. And that's what we really started on working initially at Ecovative. We've created things like this corner block here. Looks like a polystyrene corner block, but it's actually grown. It's grown from ag waste, things like corn stalks. And at the end of its useful life, it's not just industrially compostable. We are BPI certified. And I just was out in Oakland yesterday at the U.S. Composting Council talking to everyone about that. But more importantly, in our view, is it's actually home compostable. So this is a product that if it falls out of the industrial ecosystem, off the back of a garbage truck, into your yard, it is a nutrient. It's a nutrient anywhere on this planet. And our mission is to create products, not just packaging, that really are nutrients. The other important thing about the way we've approached this is instead of using a microbe to synthesize a polymer that is then, like a PLA or a PHA that may be industrial or compostable or home compostable, we're using an organism whose body is the polymer. So this is a really smart material. This is like a self-assembling polymer. And this organism is the root structure of a mushroom, and we use the mycelium or root structure to kind of bind everything together. So at Ecovative, we really grow a glue using a living organism. And while we do packaging today, which we licensed to Sealed Air Corporation now, built a 100,000 square foot plant with them in Iowa just last year, we're starting to work more on building materials for insulation. We're starting to work on replacing the urea formaldehyde in furniture, make things like tabletops, and we're looking for other places where it makes sense to have earth-friendly resins versus synthetic resins. How's that for a start?
That is great. Thanks very much. Ginger, can I hand over to you? So we'll go through the opening comments, and then we'll fire back to questions and answers at the end. So Ginger Krieg-Dozier, founder and CEO of Biomason. Great to be a neighbour in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina. Biomason, unique biotechnology startup manufacturing company with a natural process that's going to revolutionise the building and construction industry. Prior to founding Biomason, Ginger was a teaching fellow of architecture here in North Carolina, but also assistant professor of architecture at the American University in the United Arab Emirates. And Ginger was a winner of the Green Challenge last year in 2013, which is where we first met. So, Ginger, I'll hand over to you.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. As mentioned at Biomason, we've developed a technology that enables us to grow bricks using microorganisms that form a cement-type material in between grains of sand. And so unlike traditional clay and concrete products, which are fired using high heat, our process enables bricks to be grown in ambient temperatures. And our objective is to put this technology into the hands of existing masonry manufacturers across the globe. In terms of the environmental impacts, when we first started looking into a material technology, we learned that 1.23 trillion bricks are produced every year, which results in 800 million tons of carbon emissions. So what we're looking at doing is to reduce the manufacturer's cost in manufacturing, as well as making an impact on carbon reduction. And what we've learned is that over 40% of the cost of a traditional clay brick is just in the fuel that's required to manufacture the material. We're also looking into utilizing wastewater as part of our supply chain so that we can make an even larger impact and use byproducts where at all possible in our supply chains. In terms of where we are right now, we started up in 2012. We've had a very good 2013. As noted in the Green Challenge and also the Cradle to Cradle Product Innovation Challenge. And right now we're working on our first pilot order, and we're manufacturing bricks for a project in San Francisco that will be used as a paving unit. But what we see the company and the technology growing into is that we're making a hard binder. It's actually calcium carbonate, so it's very similar to a cement-like material that you would find in Portland cement. So we'll start with bricks, but we're also quite interested in other applications such as precast foundations and even underwater foundations in terms of our future developments.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ginger. And Mark Harema, Chief Executive Officer of New Light, based out in Southern California. New Light's developed an innovative process to create bioplastic from waste methane streams. And Mark has over a decade of industrial experience in this space, chemical, biological, and process engineering. Was really excited about the potential that New Light has as a sequesterer of waste methane, as a sort of an alternative to carbon capture and storage in our plastic products around the world. So, Mark, I'm going to hand over to you.
Great, thank you. So yeah, New Light started back in 2003, and the way the company started was we came across a newspaper article about methane emissions from farms, and we said, you know, right now carbon emissions are either being taxed or put underground, but what if we can find a way to use carbon that's going into the air as a way to make materials? Because if we could do that, theoretically we would have a sustainable input, and at the same time, you know, theoretically we could also make materials that could have a negative carbon footprint. And so when we started this process back in 2003, we realized that we weren't the first people to have the idea, and we certainly weren't the last. The science to do this, to turn methane emissions into plastic, had actually been there for a number of decades. But what had never been done was a way to do that cost effectively. Prior to our technology, if you were to take methane emissions and convert them into bioplastic, it was approximately 3 times more expensive than oil-based plastics. And in an industry like plastics, where everything is based off of high volume, low margin, a 3x cost premium on your products was something that simply wasn't workable. And so we spent a long time in technology development trying to figure out how we can make the process cost effective. And we had a big breakthrough a few years back on our biocatalyst. So what we do is we use a biocatalyst, and essentially that is a bundle of enzymes. And as the stream of carbon passes by the enzymes, they selectively strip out the carbon and then chain them together into a long chain of carbons, and that's our plastic molecule. In the past, the problem was that for about every 1 unit of biocatalyst, you could get about 1 unit of polymer. And this was the dynamic that lent itself to this 3x cost relative to oil-based plastics. Our big breakthrough was we discovered a way to build a new kind of biocatalyst, which increased the yield of that particular process by almost 10x. And what happened was when we did that, it dramatically changed the economics of the process to where today we can actually produce plastic material that can replace things like polypropylene, polyethylene, TPUs, and so on for less cost than the cost to produce plastics from oil. So this was our singular breakthrough was the cost advantage, and we also spent a lot of time getting the performance of our materials where we could indeed replace oil-based plastics on a drop-in type basis. So 2012 was a huge year for New Light. We had our first sale of resin, and yes, the check is on the wall. 2013 last year was what I consider to be our breakout year because 2 big things happened. One, we just announced this publicly today. We achieved our commercial scale-up of the process. So we now have a multi-acre, 4-story production plant in California that's taken carbon that would be emitted at a farm, and we're now taking that, mixing it with air, and turning it into plastics. So extremely exciting for the company, for the technology, and of course for me personally, after having worked on this for about 10 years. The second major thing that we did last year was we launched our first product to market. So we launched a chair, world's first carbon negative chair, in coordination with KI, our partner. So we're now making a number of things. I've got a couple samples here. This is just a bunch of pellets. So this is our sort of raw product. So we're taking air and methane emissions and converting it into these pellets. And these pellets are then melted down to make little things. So this is just a little clip. This is a stool seat. So my whole office is actually equipped with plastic furniture, which unfortunately I find to be very, very interesting and fun. So that's where we are today. So now our whole focus is on expansion and growing the company.
That's great, Mark. Thanks very much for that. I'm going to kick off with a few questions. Just while I'm asking Mark, there's a little bit of, I can hear you fine, but there's a little bit of distortion on your line, I think. So if you maybe look at. I don't know if you have a headset there. Can everyone hear me fine? Okay, it may be at my end, Mark.
Yeah, let me see if I can find a headset.
Thanks. So thanks very much for that, and that's obviously we're excited about all three companies that you guys are leading. Part of our network and part of a number of the people on the call today are representatives from state governments in North America and in Europe. And I wondered actually if I could offer a question for you around the role of local government support and the extent to which that's been helpful for you as a long-time native of New York State. I know New York's doing a lot of thinking about how it can encourage its clean tech economy. Could you say a few words about maybe how government policy, and particularly local government policy, has been useful to you, or what would be helpful to you going forwards?
Is that directed to me? You're breaking up just a little.
Okay. If you can hear me okay, it would be...
I heard the last part. I just wanted to make sure you directed that to me. So.
Yeah, I did, yes, to you.
Okay. Yeah. We've actually been really grateful on the government support side. One of the first things we did when we started Ecovative is we submitted a grant to an organization called NYSERDA, which taxes electricity in New York State and then provides grants to develop clean technologies. Gavin and I didn't have a lot of experience writing the grant, and we were so inexperienced that we worked for weeks and weeks and weeks, and we finally submitted it. We submitted it on the wrong day, a day late. But it ended up being great because we then went to go. They had 2 solicitations. We went and saw a grant writer, and they helped us expand it. And especially early on, grants from New York State, grants from the EPA, the USDA, and most recently the National Science Foundation have been phenomenal for us in helping us defer some of the hard science research costs that we've encountered as a business. So we've taken the approach of we're going to do R&D and commercialization concurrently. So we started releasing products into the market pretty much as soon as we started, for better or worse. And during that period, we've built up an incredible body of knowledge around how to manipulate this living polymer. And I don't think we could have done that without some of the federal and state funding, because they've allowed us to ask really key research questions that were not germane to the tactical commercial needs of our clients.
That's great. And Ginger, I know that you, when I heard you speak previously, that you had relocated back to the US and to the Raleigh-Durham area in particular to set up Biomason, having previously been in the UAE, which has no shortage of sand and need for building materials. Could you say a little bit about what brought you back to the US and whether there was any role there for the sort of government, or was it mainly for the research network in this area?
Well, absolutely. I think that one of the biggest drives for us as a company to relocate back to Raleigh was we had initially started off with a network of scientists and researchers here. We're fortunate to be in a triangle region where there are 3 major universities. But what we found, even from abroad in the UAE, was that there are a lot of state-funded service programs. So in our case, the Golden Leaf program, which is, I guess, the settlement monies from the tobacco, where farmers weren't able to produce tobacco anymore. So they're looking at other ways of driving revenue into the state. So biotechnology has really taken off in Raleigh. Raleigh being, one of the the third largest biotechnology centers in the U.S. So I think working with North Carolina State through that state-funded program was by far one of the largest drivers, but also the access to lots of key people. It's been a difficulty in terms of recruiting, just in terms of having to choose between so many good and talented people, which is a good problem for us to have.
That's great. And Mark, you've been obviously working on this for 10 years now, based in California, which is still the center of gravity within the US for the clean tech sector. What's been the role for California? What has spurred your decision to set up there?
Mostly the weather. I'm just joking. Strategically speaking, California turned out to be great. Although on its face, there was sometimes a question as to why California is not known as being the best hub for manufacturing. Although what we've found is that because of the nature of our process, being a carbon capture technology, California has been extremely supportive, and that's been true on the local level and all the way up to the state level. The various air quality boards and so on. We've had a lot of support kind of all the way around. There's an excitement to try to use California resources to make products. So whether that's methane emissions from farms here in California. Or elsewhere. One of the things in California in particular is we have a very, very large population of farms, dairy farms, cattle farms, and so on. Not a whole lot of digesters, and so there's a huge opportunity right now if you can make the economics of something like a digester work, which currently it's somewhat tenuous. Then there's a big opportunity for California, to reduce its gas emissions, to increase the economic viability of its farms. And so, across the board, we've seen a lot of support being here in California. So we're pretty happy with where we are. Recruiting is not so much of an issue. Coming into Southern California, that helps. So we're pretty happy with where we are.
Fantastic. We've got a question from one of our audience, actually, around cost, which is obviously a key element when you're looking to substitute big incumbent industries. And the question was, New Light, Mark, you mentioned the importance of cost in the plastic arena. There's obviously likely to be the same focus on costs in the construction industry in particular that Evan and Ginger, you're both partly or wholly focused on. So how do your products compare to the materials that you're looking to replace at the moment? And maybe I can start with Evan on that one. Evan, can you hear me?
I couldn't. Sorry, you're breaking up a lot.
Okay. How
do the products we're trying to replace compare?
Yeah, on cost.
On cost. Oh, okay. We've learned a lot when we entered the market around cost sensitivity from consumers, and more importantly for us, since we're mostly doing substitution of industrial commodities, it's not really the end user or the end consumer that's getting it in packaging. It's someone in purchasing who has very specific P&L responsibilities, typically outside of a sustainability scope. And we learned quickly that unless you have a value proposition that is essentially cost parity, you likely can't even get a meeting. Once you cross that hurdle, you still have to do everything else. You got to perform on time. You got to protect the product well in the case of packaging. You got to have short lead time. So you essentially have to run an operationally excellent company, have a good cost profile, and then your sustainability advantage in these cases really is a marketing tool and a way to take business. You think of in the industry as greenfield business, take business from other competitors. For us, the heart of our economic value proposition comes from the fact that we can use really low-grade feedstocks, things like corn stover, a lignocellulosic material that we can purchase for anywhere from $50 to $100 a ton, depending on sorting. And the other really, and this is really even more key than the cost of our initial substrate, is that we don't do extractive manufacturing. Typically, when you make materials, you extract what you want, and you have a waste stream that leaves your facility, and then you have your product. And in our process for our composites, the aggregate or binder and the composite, they're combined together. So the corn stover starts out as the aggregate. It's the food source for the mycelium, which becomes the binder, and then we ship that whole product to the consumer. And that gives us a really disruptive value proposition in the sense that we can use 100% of an input stream that happens to be a waste stream. What does that mean today? Dollars and cents. We can make a raw material that substitutes against 1.5 pound or 2 pound expanded polystyrene on a functionality cost neutral basis. Bill of materials, without a doubt, we are there. You can hold in your hands. What we are not at is the levels of throughput and economies of scale that really allow us to cover the overhead of our research department, our business, even applied labor on our manufacturing line. If we're doing a ton of material an hour, we're competing against plants that might be doing 1,000 tons an hour or 100,000 tons an hour. So, the applied labor portion of our cost structure needs to come down, and the only way that comes down is through throughput. But on a basis of the fundamentals, over the last 18 months or so, we really, to my satisfaction, our customers proven out that that's there.
That's great. And Ginger, I know I suspect you're a little earlier in terms of the trajectory of developing your company and the product, but can you say a few words about cost and competitiveness within the masonry sector?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's, by far, it was one of our largest challenges when we first set foot, into, looking at replacing a traditional clay brick, which has been used for thousands of years and is it's a commodity product as well. In terms of, first starting out, it's a premium product. We've, certainly, gotten the costs down just by looking at the supply chain, which I'll talk about in a second. But for us, I mean, for better or worse, as Evan mentioned too, I mean, we are looking at, selling this first order at the end of the year, and it is a premium product. We found that because the technology it's able to use a lot of different types of aggregates. So in this case, it's a waste granite fine, which is a beautiful product in the end. It looks very similar to stone. So we were able to really look at our comparisons to the stone industry as opposed to the clay brick or cement industries. But right now, in terms of our supply chains, especially for this one order, is that the client has chosen to use the waste mine tailings, which works out great for us because we're getting paid to take the waste. So when we look at, all on down through the supply chains, really trying to source products that are posing a threat to, those that can basically, we can purchase, or not purchase, in terms of getting their waste byproducts. So for example, in the mining industry, they spend millions of dollars every year just trying to prevent those fines from entering the atmosphere. So that's something that, we can combine and put into a usable building product that, for us right now is a premium product, but the way we see the trajectory going is, looking at places like the Middle East, sand is an abundant natural resource and is not currently used in construction. And that's simply because in the standards that are currently in place for concrete, those fines are not allowed. So that's a resource for us, works very, very well. We can manufacture the bricks on site and not have to worry about transportation costs or any type of large capex manufacturing, but rather look at distributed manufacturing models.
Mm-hmm. That's great, thank you. One of the things that we've found, we talked a little bit about kind of the challenges around substituting any new technology, but even with well-developed technologies like LED lighting, there's still quite a strong element of skepticism or pushback from end users around the performance. And do you find in your conversations with potential customers and clients that there's a need for a piloting process? How do you get through the initial job to sell this as a better cost competitive product compared to the product that companies and people are used to working with? And maybe can I direct that question to you, Mark? If you could,
Yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, the basic science to turn carbon emissions into plastic has been there for a long time. And so the sort of sustainability element has also been there for a long time. The reason that didn't take off commercially was cost. In our industry in plastics, unless you have a material that matches on pricing, it simply won't move outside of niche volumes. And most applications in plastics are not niche volumes. But it's more than just matching on pricing, because there's a certain cost of business to switch over to a new material. And so what we have found is that the real sort of breakthrough with this is that we're actually able to outcompete on pricing. And if you can do that, then you can start to move this stuff in large volume. And we find that it's a really important, the marketing side is great, and companies do like the ability to achieve sustainable objectives. But as much as they want to achieve those objectives, they simply can't unless the pricing is there, and of course performance. So we had to make a decision a few years ago, because we understand that the material that we make is very special. I mean, air carbon is very cool in the sense that it's made from carbon capture, and there are some places where we could command a premium for that. But we made the decision that because we can outcompete on price, that will allow us to move at high volume quickly. And even though we leave a little bit of, call it, money on the table early on, we're okay with that because it allows us to grow faster than we would otherwise if we sort of, started to come down on price slowly over time. So this is, I would say, the singular, most important element of our business model is this cost structure. And what's so exciting for me about it is by being able to outcompete on price, you actually have a structure where it's a market-driven, market-based carbon capture process where companies are actually saving money or making money off either their carbon emissions or switching over to a carbon capture product. And so then you don't necessarily have to get into big debates depending on which company you're working with. But nonetheless, as long as this material is moving, you are reducing carbon footprint. And so that's the element of this product that we find really exciting.
That's great. Just to ask a similar question that I asked for states and regions earlier, but or for local governments, but for corporate partners, potential corporate partnerships that you guys are working on or with in this space. And Evan, maybe I can direct this question to you to start off with. Can you just talk through some of the kind of key corporate partnerships that you've got at the moment that have helped you to get your product to market, either as customers or investors or a hybrid of the two?
Yeah, let me address that two ways because we've done, I would say we were gaining experience in partnerships. And we've had a couple different kinds of partnerships we've done, and some of them have been really successful, and some have not. One of the ones we did early on was a partnership with 3M Corporation, who's actually a strategic investor in Ecovative. The value proposition there at the time from their venture group is you've got a disruptive material science. 3M is all about taking new materials and applying them to products across many markets. And we said, oh, that's perfect. That's we're gonna have a great time together, guys. We'll get together. You've got this like periodic table of 3M materials. We'll put psyllium in there. We'll grow sponges. We'll do this, that. Turned out to be a disaster the first year. I mean, outside innovation is hard for companies, right? The venture groups couldn't get the business managers interested, and in a big company like that, and it's no knock against 3M. Any business manager you talk to is like, look, what's your 3, 6, and 9 month plan for me? And we say, well, we got to develop products together. We got to figure out how they might work. We have no 3-month product ready for you. And they said, we're not interested. So then you go the other way, and where we've had tremendous success with industry partnerships is working directly with an end user or an end customer. So our first partnership in packaging wasn't with a packaging company, right? Because it would have been like doing what we did with 3M. It was with a company that used packaging, Steelcase, and they really wanted this problem solved, and we treated them like like a giant partner, and we serviced them. I flew out there. We developed our packaging material blends for them. We did testing with them. We had feedback, and I'm so grateful that companies like Steelcase exist that are able to spend, and this is important because they didn't spend money. They spend brain power, right? They spend executive time, right? They spend attention. So we never got paid anything for this, but we got their focus. And for us, that's what we think the green premium delivered. And in the end result, they turned into a customer. They turned into a good customer. And we're doing now, hopefully, the same thing again with them with furniture. And once we did that, once we had a product offering we could take to more end users, then we worked our way up the value chain into the partnership with Sealed Air. But then we could talk to the world's biggest packaging company and say, hey, look at all these end users. It's not a lot. It's a list. You could count them on a couple pairs of hands. They're all using the product. They all like it. They're using more. Don't you think we could do this together? And then you're able to have a fruitful conversation. So even though Ecovative is like a material science company, I think I put on my hat and I think product when I think about how am I going to do a partnership. Who's going to use the product and then work backwards.
And Evan, did you get any sense from the interactions with those companies about what drives the willingness to invest brain power, as you said, from companies like that? Where does that come from? Is it a culture thing? Is it something that's a sort of top-down decision that we're going to look around out there for new alternatives? What is it?
Well, as you know, every company has culture, for better or worse. I think Steelcase is a pretty good culture. Many of the companies we've worked with have, sustainability initiatives. They have targets they're trying to hit. But the straight-up truth is, every time we've been successful with one of these corporations, it's because you found an individual who cares, who becomes a champion, who makes it happen internally. And those people make it happen in the best corporate cultures, right? And they make it happen in the absolute worst corporate cultures. And so in the end, again, it's think product and think people. Those are your areas of trim tab in creating change.
Mark, you talked a little bit earlier about your partnership with KI Furniture on a air carbon chair. Does that match your experience of dealing with potential customers and clients in this space?
Mark, you're on mute.
Mark, I think you're on mute.
Thanks, guys.
Right.
I said nothing important, trust me. Yeah, I think what Evan described is spot on in the sense that it's really important. We've discovered this over the years. It's really important to go in with a very, very clear understanding around what you're delivering, and to go in on a very focused basis. We're going to produce this product, with this specification sheet and so on. That's definitely been a lesson learned. And when it's very product focused, then that helps move things forward. Certainly, working with champions within the business is also critical. KI has been a special partner for us, partially because they were so patient with us early on. The material that we make has had classical, decades-old challenges, and when we first started delivering material to them, those challenges, were there as well. And fortunately, they were just very patient with us. And part of that was, another lesson learned is being as open and transparent with where you are as a company as possible, so everyone has shared expectations. And by doing that, they were comfortable working through challenges with us. Our initial materials didn't work nearly as well as they work today. Today, we're making chairs that you can't tell the difference between it and the oil-based polyolefins that they're replacing. That wasn't the case early on, but it took a large amount of transparency, working with good people who believed in the end game, and so that's true with all the companies that we're working with today. But it's been a nice template for us, and now we're working in automotive, beverages, of course in furniture, a number of other industries, and that was a really important lesson to be very specific with what you're doing, and be very open and honest as far as what your capabilities are.
That's great. And Ginger, I'm just on the theme of partnerships. I know that you've been working quite closely with Cherokee and Donna, the architect, through the challenge you were part of last year. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of partnerships for you and your business to the next stage and what you're looking for next?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think what's great about this is to hear, from both Evan and Mark about, their growth as a company, and for us, who we are a bit early, but looking at the Cherokee McDonough Challenge that we were part of last year, we were fortunate to meet with Tom Darden, who used to own a brick manufacturing company. So he gave us a lot of insight about, the manufacturing challenges, really looking into the focus of what, the manufacturers really looking at. So early on, we looked at finding a way to integrate with the equipment that the customers and the end manufacturers would be having. So that's really helped focus us, at least within the company, to look at ways that it will be easily implemented into their existing manufacturing process. But I think additionally, looking at, I guess, the drivers of our product are architects, which we're fortunate to have two architects on the team. And we know what the we're certain about the specifications that the architects are looking at. So the way the construction material world works is that the architect essentially assigns what specifications need to be for a material, and then the manufacturers at the end is really responsible for selling that case to the end user or the inhabitants of the building. So for us, it's been fortunate to work with two key architectural offices that are big believers in our process. They're big believers in the impact and change that this has, and for them, they're excited about being the first, architecture firms to specify the material, and so they're helping us really identify, the challenges in terms of the specification sheets. We're also working with the trade industry, so the masonry manufacturers, and really getting an inside angle in terms of, what really drives change for them. I mean, it's, we're talking about extraordinarily capital-intensive manufacturing facilities, in terms of the equipment that they already have, they've been using for years, and finding ways of making really their bottom line go much or further down. They're not necessarily reliant upon these fuel sources anymore, but really look at having a larger amount of control over their supply chains in the end.
That's great. That's great. I know that you got introduced to Cherokee through a price that they run. And I want to talk a little bit, all three of you actually, about prizes and challenges. And obviously the postcode lots of green challenge and the Ginger have won three organisations have racking up awards over the past few years. And maybe I can start with you, Evan, about if you could just say, to what extent has the universe of prizes, green challenges out there been useful to you? Are there any things that would make that process more useful for you going forwards? Evan, can you hear me? No.
That was pretty echoey.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
So, could you say a few words about challenges and prizes? Given that you've won quite a few between the three of you, and Evan, I just wondered if you could say what's been useful for you, what makes a good prize process, because I think one of the things that state governments in particular and others are looking at is the role of prizes in encouraging innovation, and there's obviously a proliferating group of prizes out there in the clean tech space.
Okay, so two ways to look at it. One is prizes are great as a young startup, right? It's free equity. You don't have to sell part of the company to move forward. One of the risks that I think can occur is you can get really good at winning prizes, and that was something we always tried to stay really honest about early on in our life cycle, especially because some of our early competitions we lost to teams. And I always think that when you have a prize competition, the prize should almost be decided by the people competing, because the teams competing against each other totally know like what team's full of crap or where the weaknesses are, like way more than the judges seem to. And we watch teams that would win, and then we'd say, "Oh, what are you gonna do?" They're like, "Oh, we have jobs. We just do this to make some money, and that while standing on stage and saying this is gonna be their life work." And so I think there's a risk of getting too good at winning prizes because the difference between putting a slick presentation together and executing a business is really hard. On the other hand, if you do it well and you're honest about yourself, and I've tried to get my team to stop applying for prizes. The Buckminster Fuller Award was, we'd lost a few years ago and was an exception we decided to apply for again, and we're really grateful for it because we're over it. Like it's not about getting validated for a prize. Our validation is how many pounds of material we ship. Are we making a commercially viable product? So I think prizes are a phenomenal way to incubate and start them. I think you need them all along the value chain. $5,000 awards for people who are coming out of college or high school, $25,000 awards, for that next step, and then you see something like the Green Challenge, which is like a large angel round or initial VC round that's on something they're going to take a chance on that probably wouldn't get back in the normal capital markets. That's a beautiful value chain. And the only thing I see missing right now is I know how Ecovative got through that value chain, and like each one of these was some luck. And it would be great to have that mapped out.
I like your idea around crowdsourcing the solutions to prizes. I used to work with a sports coach quite a long time ago who selected teams by just asking everyone else on the team who they'd put on the team, and it was actually, you think that's genius. That's probably the best way to do it. So maybe that's the next.
Well, I know you're often a judge though, so I don't want to reduce your work.
Yeah, Mark, we met a couple of years ago, and at the time you'd been less on the sort of circuit of, I think, of clean tech prizes out there, but had obviously been making huge progress in the meantime. Could some thoughts from you about the extent to which that's been useful in you or why you maybe didn't put into some of the prizes that were out there?
Yeah, from day one, we knew that unless we could match on performance and outcompete on price, there wasn't a whole lot to talk about. And so we made a very, very conscious effort to stay very, very quiet for a long time because there's so much talk in the green space and not a whole lot of delivery. And we found that in talking to companies early on that there was a certain amount of fatigue around this. And so we said, we're just going to keep our heads down and focus on the technology. And until the technology can speak for itself, let's just focus there. And so, years passed. It's been over 10.5 years now since we started, and it took a long time to get that technology breakthrough on price and performance. But once we did, achieve that, then it became clear to us that part of what we needed to do is make it easier for our customers to be able to share the story of air carbon with the rest of the world. So part of that is, getting recognition and validation. They help. They certainly do help because it allows our customers to tell a story. And so those things have been really great for us. Again, I totally agree with Evan in the sense that the way that we mark our success now is not necessarily by awards or prizes, but how many pounds are we moving? How much carbon are we sequestering? What is our price point? How much are we moving on just bottom line, fundamental economics? But at the same time, I really do think that prizes and awards are helpful to companies. They give you recognition that helps you move product. I think things like the Green Challenge are great because they do move substantial amounts of capital that might not otherwise be there. You incubate great ideas that might have otherwise taken a longer amount of time to come to market. And so I do think that there's a huge amount of value around that. I mean, ultimately it does come down to how well you can execute, but in general I think they're really valuable things.
That's great. I want to talk about investment and raising capital as an early stage company. And Evan, I think you mentioned earlier on in the conversation that when you're talking to potential customers, you don't really push the clean tech side. It's more about just the value of the product. And there's obviously been a plateauing out of plastic venture capital in this space from a couple of years ago, and you've got companies like Kleiner Perkins now who are not raising any new funds, and there's been quite a despondent atmosphere in the West Coast clean tech investment space for the last year or so.
Yeah.
Has that impacted you guys? I mean, maybe I can ask you this, Ginger. In terms of your ability to raise early stage capital from venture capital companies, has it been challenging to be sort of in the clean tech space to try and present it as being something different in order to get the interest? Ginger.
Okay, sorry. That's right. For us, when we did come back, to the U.S., it was really a search to find that early investment funding. And for us, we found a group called Acorn Investments who they invest in early stage manufacturing companies. So for them, I mean, it was a win-win in terms of the vision that they have about utilizing smart materials for environmental good. And for them, they were able to look at a lot of different technologies that are around, and in particular this region. They're a new fund. They've been around for a couple of years, but their funding comes from family manufacturing background. So I think for us, it was what was nice about the early funding was that they everyone was completely honest and knew what the challenges were ahead of us, and fully believe and encourage execution on all fundamental levels. We are constantly active with them. We just visited Evan up in New York a couple of weeks ago, and that's something for us that I think was fortunate. I'm not sure how much of that exists out there, but for us it was the largest sting of energy that we could have at that time.
That's great. Just as we're at the end of the Q&A part, if I could ask you maybe just each in turn to talk a little bit about the what next for you guys, for an audience of policymakers, corporate representatives and investors out there. Kind of what's the next stage in your journey? What are you looking for next? What would be the most helpful to you? And Evan, maybe I can start with you.
Sure. For us, we're focused really on two things over the next 2 years. One is we have a protected packaging product. We've got a licensee that's using it. They've got their own plant. We want to assure that that startup continues to grow and is successful, and that more plants get built, not just in the U.S., but obviously in Asia and Europe and all around the world where these materials are produced. So that's really a key focus for us. That's kind of our first growth driver as a company. And then I'd say the other is around new products. So we have a platform for growing a resin in a really unique, disruptive way, which stretches from where we are today, which is commodity materials essentially, all the way up to some pretty high-tech materials where you can control the grown microstructure of the polymer you're making, which you can't do with plastics today. So the other kind of half of our goal right now is to actually start to bring some of these other products to market and prove to ourselves that there are more applications for this platform.
Thanks. Mark, can I hand over to you? What are you looking for next in the New Light?
Yeah, so last year was really a sort of line in the sand year for us. Scaling up the technology to commercial scale was a really big deal. Launching our first product to market was a really big deal, because what it meant was we had sort of come full circle on technology development. And so our focus for this year is all about commercial expansion. So we're now working with a number of the largest companies in the world to bring products to market, and to do so at meaningful scale. So we're working with companies on both the product development and product launch side, but also with companies on the production side. So it's all about expansion this year, and it's all about how do we now take this technology, which we feel is developed, and how do we grow it to the largest scale possible. So that's the whole focus, and obviously I can't get into too much detail as far as who we're working with, but it's a really, really exciting time for us. For me personally, after having spent so many years in the back of a cold factory, yes, it's Southern California, but it does get cold back there, to turn our attention now to just building this thing out is really fun. It's really exciting. So that's where we are.
Fantastic. Ginger, your next steps on the road for Biomason?
So for us this year, it's all focused energies on getting this pilot order together. And for us, we're going through a lot of the scaling issues that come up. But most importantly, the reason why that this first order is so important is that it will be the first real-world test. So you will be able to go and visit and walk and look, over time through the weathering process. You can do all the tests that you can possibly in the world in the lab, in a testing center, but it's really the real-world application testing that matters for us in the construction industry. And so for now, that is what is on the horizon for this year. After that, it's about enticing people to come through and get further, interest, further customer acquisitions, so that we can really scale the company that we've intended from not just in the U.S. but on a global scale as well.
That's great. Well, as a Climate Group, we're hugely excited about all three of your business models. I've obviously known some of you longer than others, but really excited, firstly, about the impact that your products can have on some big incumbents and impactful industries, and also about you as entrepreneurs being able to take that forward. So we'll be continuing to cheer from the sidelines for you guys, and hopefully we can we can help out in connecting you to some of the policymakers and companies within our network through our innovation program as we go forwards. But just to say thank you very much for your time today. I also want to say thank you to my colleagues in New York, particularly to Kirsten Strom and Davida Heller, and our US Director Amy Davidson for pulling this hangout together. Thank you to the Postcode Lottery for their support for the Climate Group's work, and also through our partnership on the Green Challenge. The next event on our next Google Hangout will be on April the 23rd, and we'll be circulating more information about that, and obviously we'll be then putting that out to our network shortly after that date. And we'll be sending out an online survey, short survey, for our speakers and audience straight after this. It'd be great to get your feedback, but thank you for being our Google Hangout guinea pigs in the meantime, and look forward to working with you guys going forwards.